They say the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in familiar comfort. In the smell of coffee brewing on a Sunday morning and the sound of your husband's voice saying, "I love you," like it costs him nothing. I didn't know I was being poisoned for 11 months. I want to say that clearly, up front, because when I look back now, I feel the particular shame of a woman who was trained to doubt herself so thoroughly that she almost died of it. My husband and I hosted game night every other Friday. It started the year we moved into our house in Naperville, a brick colonial on a quiet street with good schools and neighbors who waved from their driveways. We had a whole ritual. He'd handle the drinks, I'd handle the snacks. Our best friends, another couple we'd known since grad school, would arrive by 7, trailing wine and the kind of easy laughter that only exists between people who've seen each other through hard things. I loved those nights. I loved the low light in our dining room, the board games spread across the table, the way my husband would refill my glass without my asking, "You look tired, baby. Drink up." He always made me a special cocktail. A gin fizz with elderflower, a little sweeter than standard. He'd started doing it 2 years into our marriage as a kind of joke, "I know what you like," and it had just become our thing, mine alone. Our friends drank beer and wine. I had my glass. I don't remember exactly when I started losing the games. Actually, that's not quite right. I remember exactly, it was October, almost 2 years ago now. But the losing was so gradual it felt like weather, like something you just learned to live inside. My concentration would go soft around the second hour. My words would start to slip sideways. I'd laugh at things that weren't that funny, misplace my train of thought mid-sentence, and by 9:30 I'd be listing in my chair while my husband put a steady hand on my shoulder and said, "She's wiped. She's been pushing hard at work." And I believed him. Everyone did. I was a physical therapist with a heavy caseload and a long commute. Being tired made sense. I saw my doctor in December. Blood work was fine. She mentioned sleep hygiene, suggested magnesium, asked about my stress levels. I went home and took the supplements and kept feeling worse and told myself it was perimenopause anxiety because I'd read an article and I was 32 and I was looking for something that made sense. The night I found out was a Friday in September. I had a migraine that afternoon, the real kind, with the aura, the nausea, and I'd texted my husband that I might cancel game night. He'd pushed back, gently, said our friends were already planning on it, said fresh air and company would help more than lying in a dark room. So I went through the motions, I showered, I put on my good jeans, and when he handed me my glass at 7, I took one sip, and then quietly, because my stomach was already delicate, I set it on the shelf behind the couch and forgot about it. I drank water all night, sparkling from the fridge. I felt sharper than I had in months. I noticed it the way you notice the moment a fever breaks, a sudden clarity, a sense of your own edges returning. I could track the conversation. I followed the game. I was funny, the real kind, not the loose laughing kind. And at one point, my husband looked at me across the table with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not affection, not irritation, something calculating, like a man running numbers in his head. It was there for half a second, then gone. He smiled and said something about the game, and I smiled back, and inside my chest something cold settled, slow and certain, the way concrete sets. After our friends left, I washed the dishes. My husband was on his phone in the living room. I found my barely touched glass on the shelf where I'd left it, and, almost without knowing why, I poured it into an empty spice jar I found in the cabinet. I sealed it and tucked it into the zippered pocket of my gym bag, which he never touched. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to my husband and listened to him breathe and thought about every Friday for the past 11 months. In the morning, while he was at his Saturday golf game, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and I looked up a private toxicology lab. There was one in Chicago, 40 minutes away, that accepted walk-in samples from private individuals. No referral needed. They tested for a broad panel of sedatives and central nervous system depressants. The turnaround was 5 to 7 business days. I drove to Chicago with the spice jar in my bag and a story prepared about a drink I found at a party, just want to make sure it was safe. The technician didn't even blink. She processed the paperwork, labeled the jar, and sent me home with a case number. I told no one. Not my sister, not my best friend, not the woman I'd been texting almost daily for 3 years who also happened to be married to my husband's closest friend. I told no one because I was still hoping I was wrong. The results came back on a Thursday. I was sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot between patient sessions when the email came through with a PDF attachment. I opened it. The top of the report listed the sample type, the date of collection, and then below that a breakdown of detected compounds. Zolpidem, a sedative hypnotic, the kind prescribed for insomnia. The kind that makes you foggy and pliant and unable to concentrate and perfectly, deniably sleepy. I sat in my car for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I looked at the elm trees at the edge of the parking lot and I thought about my husband handing me a glass every single Friday for almost a year and saying, "Drink up." And I thought about the night I'd sat at our dinner table and cried because I was scared something was neurologically wrong with me, and he'd held my hand and said, "I'll figure it out with you. We'll get through this together." I drove back in to see my 2 o'clock patient. I did range of motion assessments and wrote my notes and said goodbye, and then I sat at my desk and made a decision. I was not going to the police yet. I was going to find out why. Because sedating your wife on Friday nights is not a plan, it's a means to an end, and I needed to know the end. I started the way any reasonably panicked person starts. I looked for things hiding in plain sight. That weekend, while my husband was in the garage, I went to his home office. He worked in commercial real estate and the office reflected it. Clean, organized, a filing system color-coded by year. I'd been in there 100 times. I was looking for anything financial that felt off, a new account, a policy, something I didn't recognize. I found it in the second drawer. A manila folder, no label. Inside, a summary page from a life insurance policy. My name. A policy I'd signed when we bought the house. I remembered the signing, the pen, the notary. But the beneficiary line had been updated 6 months ago. The original had said my husband. The updated one said my husband's business partner. My husband's business partner was a man I'd met maybe 8 times. We'd had dinner twice, exchanged pleasantries at a firm event. His wife had given us a cactus as a housewarming gift. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I walked to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists and looked at myself in the mirror and made myself breathe. That afternoon, I called my older sister in Phoenix. Not to tell her everything, I wasn't ready, just to have a reason to talk out loud to someone who loved me. She asked how I was doing. I said, "Fine, just a long week." We talked about her kids. After we hung up, I felt steadier, steady enough to make another call. I found a private investigator through a recommendation buried in a women's legal forum online, a thread titled, "What to Do When You Think Something is Wrong But Can't Prove It Yet." His name was Corbett. He had a flat Midwestern voice, and he did not seem surprised by anything I told him. "I want to know about the business partner," I said, "and I want to know if there's a financial motive." He called me back 3 days later. The business partner, I'll call him my husband's associate, because I refused to give him more weight than that, had extended himself significantly in a commercial development deal that had gone sideways. He'd taken out personal loans against projected returns that hadn't materialized. He was facing margin calls. My husband's firm was solvent, but only because of a recapitalization that had gone through 8 months ago. My husband had personally guaranteed part of a bridge loan. If the business collapsed, he was exposed to the tune of several $100,000. My life insurance policy was worth $750,000. Corbett paused. "I want to be straightforward with you. This is the kind of financial pressure that motivates people to do things they wouldn't otherwise consider." I already knew. I'd known since the parking lot in the abstract way you know things before you're ready to say them out loud. I asked him if he could dig deeper, financials, communications, anything linking my husband to the policy change or to the associate situation. He said he'd try. He also said, very quietly, you should not be drinking anything he prepares for you. You should not be alone with him in isolated situations. And you should consider whether there's someone safe you can stay with. I thanked him and didn't leave. I know how that sounds, but I'd been in my house for 4 years. My things were there. My cat was there, and something in me, The same part that had been sitting with the knowledge of the glass for 2 weeks without breaking, wanted to understand the full shape of it before I moved. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked, claiming a phase of bad sleep and a need for quiet. My husband accepted this with a kind of careful, managed patience that now made my skin crawl. He brought me chamomile tea. I poured it down the bathroom sink. The next game night, I played along perfectly. I accepted my glass. I took a small sip for appearance. Then I spent the evening subtly disposing of it. A little in a plant, a little when I went to freshen up, a little into a paper cup in the recycling. I stayed sharp. I tracked everything. I noticed that my husband's associate across the table watched me with a specific kind of attention whenever I seemed to drift. Not concern. Assessment. Like he was calibrating something. At one point, his wife, the woman who had given us a cactus, the woman I had texted almost daily for 3 years, leaned over and topped up my glass herself. She said, "You look like you need this." She said it warmly. She touched my shoulder. Her hand lingered. I looked at her and I smiled and I said, "Thank you. Honestly, I really do." And inside I felt something close in my chest like a door. She was part of it. Corbett confirmed it 2 days later. He'd obtained records, I didn't ask how, of communications between my husband and the associates stretching back 8 months. There was a thread, indirect and carefully worded, about a resolution to the business situation. There were references to a timeline. There was a message from the associate's wife, sent from a personal account, not her work email, that said simply, "She's compliant, stay consistent." And my husband's reply, "Not much longer." I read the printouts Corbett left in a dead-drop location, a library book I'd requested, which he'd slipped pages into before I picked it up. I read them sitting in my car in a library parking lot in Lille, Illinois, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to feel everything. Then I folded the papers, I put them in the zippered pocket of my gym bag, and I called Corbett from my work phone. "I want to set a trap," I said. "And I need 2 things. I need someone from insurance fraud to be listening when I do it. And I need a reason for my husband to say the whole plan out loud." Corbett was quiet for a moment. "I know someone at the Illinois Department of Insurance." A pause. "And I have an idea about the reason." He sent my husband's associate an anonymous message, routed through 3 servers, Corbett said, essentially untraceable, that appeared to come from a burner associated with a loan company. It stated that the note on the associate's personal loan had been called. Full balance due in 30 days. It was not real, but it was exactly specific enough to be terrifying. We waited. 2 days later, my husband came home from work earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen. He sat at the island and he was not quite himself. There was a tightness around his eyes, the kind of stillness that meant he was managing something. He said, "We should talk about the future." He said, "I've been thinking about life, about where we are, about protecting what we've built." He said, "If anything ever happened to you, I want to make sure everything is in order." I held my coffee mug with both hands and looked at him and said, "What kind of order?" That night I left a voice-activated recorder, a small one, the kind journalists use, in the drawer of his desk. It was slim enough to sit beneath a stack of folders. I'd handled it with gloves. I'd tested it in my car for 2 hours beforehand. On Thursday, he made a call from his home office. The recording ran 41 minutes. I won't recount the whole thing. I have listened to it exactly once, in Corbett's car, parked behind a strip mall in Downers Grove. What I will tell you is that my husband and his associate talked about me like I was a liability position. They talked about the Friday's sedatives, the routine, my husband called it, like it was a maintenance schedule. They talked about the escalation, about how the routine would need to shift to something more final. They mentioned the associate's wife and her access to a prescription pad through a physician friend of hers, and how it would look like an accidental overdose complicated by a history of documented cognitive episodes. My cognitive episodes, the ones my husband had helpfully told our family doctor about, the ones my doctor had noted in my chart, the ones he'd been building for 11 months, one dread Friday at a time. By the time it ended, I had the full shape. I called my sister in Phoenix that night. I told her everything. She was on a flight the next morning. She stayed at a hotel 2 miles away. I did not tell my husband she was in town. The game night I chose was a Friday in November. I told my husband I was feeling better, clearer, I said, which was true, and that I wanted to have everyone over one more time before the holidays got complicated. He agreed too quickly. He said he'd handle the drinks. I let him. I texted Corbett Friday, our house, 8 o'clock. The Illinois Department of Insurance had sent an investigator, a woman named Agent Sue. She asked me to call her that, who arrived at 6:30 before anyone else, and sat in my kitchen and drank actual coffee and looked at everything I'd laid out on the table. The recorder, the toxicology report, the insurance documents, the financials, the printed communication thread. She read through everything methodically, flipping pages, saying nothing. Then she looked up and said, "Okay, we'll be outside. You have my number. When it goes far enough, you call or you signal." I nodded. My sister squeezed my hand from across the table. Our friends arrived at 7:15. My husband was charming, loose, relaxed in the way of a man who believes the ground is solid. The associate opened wine. His wife brought a dessert, chocolate bark with sea salt, her usual thing, and set it on the counter with a warm smile and asked me how I was feeling. "Better," I said. "I really think I've turned a corner." She touched my arm. "Good," she said. "You had us worried." My husband handed me my glass, the elderflower gin fizz. I took it with both hands. "You're the best," I said. "You always know what I need." He smiled. There was something satisfied in it. We played for an hour. I was sharp, present, winning, because I'd poured my drink into the potted fern by the back door the first chance I had. And I watched my husband's face move through small adjustments each time I made a clean move or said something precise. He was recalibrating. The schedule wasn't working. The routine was somehow off. At the second hour, I set down my cards. I said, "I want to say something." The table went quiet. I looked at my husband first, and then at the associate, and then at his wife. I said, "I stopped drinking the cocktails about 2 months ago. I had the last one tested. I know it was in it. I kept my voice level, the way you keep your voice level when you've practiced it enough times. I know about the policy. I know about the beneficiary change. I know about the loan and the timeline and the prescription plan." I paused. "I know about the call on Thursday." My husband's face did something I had never seen it do. The architecture of it changed. The warmth, the reasonableness, the practiced concern, all of it slid sideways at once, and what was underneath was a stranger. "You're being paranoid," he said. His voice was still controlled. "This is exactly the kind of thinking I'd been worried about." "I'm sure it is," I said, and I put my phone on the table and pressed play. The recording filled the kitchen. His voice, the associate's voice, the routine, the timeline, the prescription, and the history of cognitive episodes. His wife's voice, clear and direct, "She's compliant." The associate saying, "How much longer?" My husband saying, "Not long." My husband saying, "Not long." The associate stood up so fast his chair fell. "That's inadmissible," he said. "You recorded that illegally. That's—" "Illinois is a one-party consent state," I said. I was a party to the conversation. I placed the device in my own home. His wife had gone the color of uncooked dough. She was looking at the recording like it was something alive. My husband stood slowly. He said my name. He said it quietly, and he said it the way he used to say it, early in our marriage, and for 1/2 second something in me lurched. I want to be honest about that. There are no clean moments in a thing like this. Even when you know everything, even when you've been methodical and careful and furious, hearing your own name in that voice does something. I looked at him and I said, "Don't." Then I sent the signal, a text to Agent Sue that said simply "now," and 30 seconds later there was a knock at the front door. My husband moved toward the back of the house. I'd anticipated this. I had locked the back door that afternoon and changed the code on the garage pad to something only I knew. He stood at the back door rattling the handle while Agent Sue's colleague, a second investigator, came in the front and positioned himself in the hall. "Mr." Agent Sue said, stepping into the kitchen. She showed her credentials. "We'd like to speak with you and your associates regarding a suspected insurance fraud scheme and suspected criminal poisoning. She looked at him steadily. "I'd recommend not going anywhere." He turned from the back door. He looked at me. "You did this," he said. His voice had gone flat. "Yes," I said. The associate's wife started crying. It was the kind of crying that wanted something from you, sympathy, softening. And I looked at her face and felt nothing but a clean, cold absence. She had texted she's compliant and touched my arm and brought me chocolate bark and told me I'd had them worried. She had watched me get fuzzier and softer and more easily managed every other Friday for months, and she had helped. The police arrived 11 minutes later. I sat on my front porch with my sister while they were inside. The November air was sharp, and the neighbor's porch light was on, and somewhere down the street a dog was barking. My sister didn't say anything. She just sat with her shoulder against mine. That was enough. The next weeks were not simple. I want to be honest about that too. There were statements and interviews and a grand jury proceeding and a victim advocate assigned to my case who called me every Tuesday and whose name I will always remember because she was steady and precise in the way that very few people are in a crisis. There were moments, alone in my house at 2 in the morning, waiting for the locks I'd changed to feel like enough, when the enormity of what had almost happened would move through me like a wave, and I'd have to sit on the bathroom floor and breathe through it. I did not fall apart. I also did not pretend not to feel it. At trial, the prosecutor laid it out with the kind of methodical clarity that makes terrible things comprehensible. 11 months of documented sedation, verified by a toxicology timeline my doctor was able to reconstruct once she understood what she was looking at. A $750,000 life insurance policy with a fraudulently updated beneficiary, a financial motive stretching back 18 months, a communications record documenting conspiracy, a recorded conversation that Agent Sue described to the jury as among the most premeditated material I have encountered in 14 years of insurance fraud investigation. My husband received 22 years. His associate, who entered a guilty plea during trial preparation in exchange for reduced charges, received 12. His associate's wife, the one who had access to the prescription relationship, the one who had texted me she's compliant, received 8 years after her own plea and cooperation with the state. The beneficiary change was reversed. The policy remained valid in my name. I sold the house in Naperville. I didn't want a single room of it. I moved to a smaller place near the lake, the kind of apartment with tall windows and a radiator that clicks at night and a fire escape I've never used. I kept my cat. I kept my job. I have a new, regular coffee order, and I take my Friday evenings exactly as I please. My sister calls every Sunday. The victim advocate sends me a card at Christmas. Corbett, the investigator, occasionally forwards me news articles about financial fraud cases with a 2-word message, reminds me. I write back, me too. I don't think about my husband the way I used to. I've stopped trying to locate the exact moment when the man I married became the man who drugged me every other Friday and built a medical record out of thin air and looked at my life and saw a number. I used to believe that kind of understanding was something I owed myself. Now I think the more honest thing to say is, he made his choices and I survived them, and those two facts are complete without explanation. What I think about instead is the Friday I didn't drink the gin fizz. The headache that made me set the glass down and forget it. The spice jar. The parking lot in Lyle where I read a toxicology report and allowed myself 10 minutes to feel everything. 10 minutes is not a long time, but it was enough to decide. I am not a brave person in any dramatic sense. I am a physical therapist from Naperville who liked game night and trusted the wrong person for too long. But I paid attention when it mattered. I asked the right questions when they mattered. I did not wait to be rescued. That is the whole story. There is nothing underneath it. There is just a woman who is still here, living in an apartment with tall windows and a radiator that clicks, taking her Friday evenings exactly as she pleases, and that after everything is enough. I think about the spice jar a lot. That small glass jar I grabbed from the cabinet without fully knowing why, rinsed out, filled with the rest of my drink, sealed, and tucked into the pocket of my gym bag like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Nobody told me to do that. There was no plan yet. There was just a quiet instinct. Something's wrong, hold on to the proof. And I listened to it. That instinct, I've come to understand, was the beginning of everything that saved me. What happened to me didn't happen because my husband was unlucky, or because the circumstances were unusual, or because anyone involved was fundamentally different from the people around you. It happened because three people decided that what they wanted, money, security, a way out of a financial mess of their own making, was worth more than my life. They made that calculation slowly, deliberately, over 18 months. And they were able to keep making it, Friday after Friday, because they had counted on one thing, that I would keep doubting myself more than I doubted them. That's the part I sit with the longest. Not the anger, which came and went. Not the grief, which surprised me with how real it was. But the recognition that the most effective thing they did wasn't the sedative in the glass. It was the years of subtle, patient work that made me the kind of woman who would blame her own brain before she would question her husband's hands. I'm not saying that to assign blame to myself. I'm saying it because I think it's the most honest and useful thing I can offer anyone who hears this story. The people who want to take something from you rarely come in loud. They come in warm. They come in consistent. They come in the form of someone who fills your glass before you ask and calls it love. What I know now is that moral character, real integrity, the kind that holds up when it's inconvenient, shows itself most clearly in the small moments. In whether you tell the truth when a lie would be easier. In whether you protect someone who trusts you or use that trust as a tool. My husband failed that test every single Friday for 11 months. His associate and his wife failed it every time they sat across a game table from me and smiled. The failure wasn't dramatic. It was just quiet and repeated, until it became something much worse than a single bad choice. And I held up, because I paid attention. I don't think I'm exceptional. I think I was scared and methodical and willing to sit with uncertainty long enough to understand what I was actually looking at. That's not courage in the movie sense. It's closer to stubbornness, the decision to not let someone else's story about you become the only story, to keep asking questions even when the answers are frightening, to collect the spice jar, drive to Chicago, wait for a PDF, and then do the next hard thing, and then the next one after that. Corbett told me once, sitting in his car behind that strip mall in Downers Grove, that most people in my situation either act too fast out of panic or wait too long out of hope. I had wanted to be neither. I wanted to understand the full shape of it before I moved, and I wanted to move precisely when it mattered. That kind of discipline. The patience to gather before you act, the resolve to act when you have enough, is something I had to build in real time under the worst possible conditions. I don't have a clean lesson to offer at the end of this. What I have is a radiator that clicks at night in an apartment I chose for myself, a sister who calls every Sunday, and the memory of a Friday in November when I sat at my own table and told the truth out loud to the people who had been counting on my silence. That was enough. It turned out to be exactly enough.